All right, thanks everyone for joining us for this last panel of the day for New York City AgTech Week. Have the pleasure of hosting a panel on failed farms with Henry Gordon Smith, Desmond Hayes, and Shannon Crow. Thank you all for joining us. I want to just give off some introductions first, just so everybody can get acquainted with our speakers today. Henry Gordon Smith is a sustainable strategist focused on urban ag, water issues, and emerging technologies. He earned his BA in political science from the University of British Columbia, has done coursework in food security and urban agriculture from Ryerson University in Toronto, and has a master's in science in sustainability management from Columbia University. Henry is the founder of Agritecture Consulting, an advisory firm which has now consulted on over 150 urban agriculture projects in over 35 countries. He has also been named as a top 20 influencer in food and agriculture by Rabobank. Thanks for joining us, Henry. Welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Albert. Good to be here.
Yeah. And next up, we have Desmond Hayes, who is the founder of GeoGreens, an indoor hydroponic farm located in Hamilton, New Jersey, that serves local fresh produce to the tri-state New York City area. One of their ultimate goals is to become as close to a zero-waste farm as possible. Their current customer base includes schools and institutions, local restaurants and supermarkets, food banks and pantries, soup kitchens, assisted living, hospital, and wellness centers. Desmond has degrees in architecture, civil engineering, and environmental science. He was previously a construction project manager serving the New York and New Jersey area prior to starting GeoGreens full-time. Thank you for joining the panel, Desmond. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hey, Albert. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And last but not least, we have Shannon Crow, who has over 12 years of experience in commercial agriculture and bioengineering, specializing in organizational change management, team development, and ops. With a passion for values-led businesses, Shannon has co-founded an aquaponics B2C company, spearheaded the agriculture operations department at Bowery Farming, and served as chief of staff at Farm Together, a tech-enabled asset manager. She received her BA in Global Studies and Economics from St. Edward's University with coursework at the Universidad del Belgrano and Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University. Hope I said those right. She graduated from Cornell University's Lead NY Leadership in Agriculture Fellowship and is currently attending an executive coaching program at the Door Institute for New Leaders at the Jones Business School of Rice University. Welcome to the panel, Shannon. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much.
Great. So just to kick it off, had a question for you, Henry, more like a macro view question about some farms that might have failed, but you've had the benefit of consulting on numerous projects worldwide, as well as meeting a lot of operators in the industry. Can you give me an example off the top of your head of just a farm that has failed that you remembered recently at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some failures from the beginning and across the sort of era of controlled environment agriculture and vertical farming. But I think one that stands out to me that is kind of close to my heart because it was the first commercial vertical farm in North America called Local Garden, which opened up in Vancouver. You know, it got some support from the government. It was sort of one of these ideal visions of an urban farm. It was a greenhouse with vertical systems on top of a parking garage. So it was downtown. It was maximizing unused space. And it had a heavy tech play with sort of these rotating systems in it. However, it failed pretty quickly and very dramatically for a couple of reasons. And these reasons remain the same for why a lot of them fail. And I think one of the key ones is just choosing your crop selection appropriately for the market conditions. You know, this was an urban farm that was very sexy and cool and got a lot of attention, but they were very focused on their technology and they limited what they could grow to basically a mix of salad greens that would be packaged. But they were literally right downtown from most of the premium restaurants in the city. So, you know, if you had done appropriate market research, you would have found that, you know, by serving those restaurants close to your farm, you're going to get the best price for your product. But that means that you're going to have to adjust your farm to grow a wider variety. And I think that they were just very focused on their tech and didn't think enough about the market. And this is a mistake that we see over and over again in the vertical farming sector, especially. Now, there's been other failures. I'm happy to talk about them some more. But I think that one is a really interesting example and quite sad because a year and a half after starting, it was all the equipment was for sale on Craigslist. It was a pretty dismal failure. And then, you know, Vancouver has yet to really incentivize vertical farming since then, and it's almost been a decade.
It seemed like it was a missed opportunity there for them. Was that the one, now that you mention it, was that the one where it was kind of like on a conveyor belt track, almost like a dry cleaners, essentially.
Yeah,
where like
yeah,
it
it
would
was
just
like a
go
dry
around.
cleaner
Yeah,
setup.
I remember seeing that. But when I first saw it, I was like, how are the plants at the bottom getting any light? Because they weren't using supplemental lighting, right? So
Well, so that's another failure, right? Is
Yeah.
like the tech focus wasn't really planned properly, right? Like if you're planning a greenhouse, you need to do DLI calculations. If you're planning a vertical farm, you need to think about making sure you have enough light hitting all the plants consistently. And I think that their rotating system was, what they thought was cool and sexy. They're like, oh, we'll rotate the plants around and they'll get access to even light. Well, if anybody's been to Vancouver, you know that it could be gray for 60 days in a row and just sort of a light drizzle. So that's not really going to be enough light to create consistent product and cultivation. So they ended up having to retrofit it and add artificial lighting. But then as they did that, they sort of realized, okay, if they sort of spaced out the artificial lighting, that was a huge new CapEx. And then they sort of realized like, oh, actually, it's better if we just don't move them. There were some obvious deficiencies in the plants at the bottom when I saw them. And then when I went back, they weren't even rotating the systems. They just sort of had static lighting, in which case the whole framework and the whole farm at that point was just like putting band-aids on it. And that's the problem, is the capex of these farms is so big that if you don't plan properly, you're kind of screwed.
Good point.
Can I piggyback off that? That's
Go ahead. Yeah.
Perfect point. And I know one, fairly recent farm that's located in Delaware, and they basically were functioning off of prefabricated system, stacking system. Again, look nice, sexy. They had a nice little space. They had community support. They had a decent business model, whereas they were hiring recently incarcerated people. So they were getting the community involved. They had some capital involved. Their problem was they didn't know how to farm, which is this is another thing that a lot of people don't realize. Like, it's an art, and definitely the guys that have the expertise, the botanists, the culturists, the ones that have the expertise with it. It's definitely 100% of science to it, but there's certain things, certain traits that you can actually pick up by just learning how to just do it on a hobbyist level, and then escalating it and scaling it to the point where you can, have a successful, not failed business for it. These guys, got all the system. They actually opened up in the middle of the pandemic, which I thought was a little bit on the risky side. But if you got it and you can take care of it, everything to them. But they got everything ramped up. They got the system installed, hooked up. But the problem is, again, they didn't know how to farm, and they didn't know all the idiosyncrasies, all the details with the actual prefabricated system. So when I say that, the cleaning of it, the maintenance of it, how much yields you're going to get, how much light and humidity is going to be within the actual space. All those things have to be thought about. It can't just be, okay, this is a great idea, let's just start growing. And when I actually visited that outfit, this is, again, during the pandemic time, walked through, it looked decent. They had things going. And, towards the conclusion of the tour, the walk-in cooler, and it's just filled and stocked. And I'm sitting there like, where is all this going? You guys have this sold, right? And nobody could say anything. And I didn't want to, I'm just a tour. I'm just not going to just sit there and belabor it too much. But that was also the issue. They were hitching their wagon to one contract. And that was one thing where I wanted to make sure we separated ourselves from it. If you're one of these outfits that, have those connections, those networks, to be big distributor or mass produce and get all those things out, you can go that route. But to Henry's point, if you have to do the market research, you have to know what your audience is, you have to know the demographics. You can't drop, a large amount of, I'll just use lettuce in the middle of, food insecure or food insecure area that's primarily, Black or brown. We don't really think about lettuce from that standpoint. You got to think of ethnic backgrounds, the habits, those types of things too, for it to be a successful venture. You can't, copy and paste, to things that, Arrow Farms might be doing over here, or Bowery might be doing over here. You have to do that market research. And those guys, unfortunately, they saw their demise, I want to say maybe a year or so after the fact, because again, nobody knew how to farm. So right off the back, the CapEx is high. Now you're learning how to farm on the go. You're already hemorrhaging money. So now you're already in the red and you're still learning. Now you have to really understand the system. You're still going, you're still in the red, you're still losing money. So, unfortunately, it was just a bad situation altogether. And that one deal that they were waiting for fell through. So now you have all this equipment. Now you have everything going on. You're a year in, you're in the red, and now you have nowhere to send this produce and this product. So it was just a bad deal all around at the end of the day.
Yeah, I've had those conversations too from the B2B side, where it's like so many people are interested in your product or what you're doing, but at the end of the day, until the money hits the bank account, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah,
and they could promise you, all they say, oh, we want to work with you, we love what you're doing, we got these LOIs, because money doesn't hit the bank account, doesn't matter. And so, like, yeah, if you put all your eggs in one basket there, definitely some detrimental outcomes can happen. Awesome perspective. Thanks, guys. Shannon, I want to jump over to you real quick, because you have a very interesting case from the marijuana growing side, because I want to try to dive a little bit into that, because we haven't really talked about that in NYC AgTech Lead panels, but I think it's really interesting to see if there's any parallels within that space to growing vegetables, and what the differences are there. If you can kind of speak to about like the project that you were involved in and what happened, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll speak to that project, and I do want to just have this really quick piggyback off what Desmond
Sure.
said. And one of the things that is really apparent, and I'm kind of hearing from the stories so far today, there's this really strong tension that I think is incredibly manifest in the cannabis industry, which is people who have been home growers or hobbyists looking to scale and like maybe missing some market research, maybe having too big a focus on what's like new and sexy, like Henry said. And then people who have money to burn and can afford to just iterate and kind of encroach and gentrify an industry, because it doesn't actually matter if they, are positive cash flow in 6 months or even a year. And so I've actually worked for both. I'm the one that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about kind of two failures specifically. One was a multi-generational like family farm in Northern California that was looking to go legal. And so I consulted with them to kind of help them through that process. It's incredibly difficult, particularly I think, Albert, to your point, like there's this mental switch, right? Between, oh my goodness, if I write anything down on paper, the cops are going to come and there's proof that I was growing weed. And then like, oh, then I have to do like CapEx planning and a budget, right? Like that's a huge gap. And that's one of the main reasons why I think one of the main reasons we see failure in cannabis is there's just not a lot of educated labor helping solve that gap. So people who have these people had amazing in-depth knowledge of how to grow cannabis without having any PhDs, right? They had just actually done it for generations. Like, we don't know why it works, but it works and we're happy that it works. And pulling that from them was so cool. And then I worked for I was like third or fourth person on like a really tight, small 6-person team who started our operations in Colorado. And they were all like oil and gas engineers, heavily financially backed, incredibly politically connected, which we don't like to talk about, but it is really critical to winning some of those like elusive state licenses. And there was areas where like our work failed. And then we made this kind of pivot to pursuing the market in a different way and just dominated. We've won every license that we've applied to. And so I think that kind of, to summarize a very long statement, that kind of tension, right, between I love this, but I'm learning how to actually be a business person. I get plans and I've got business down, I've got money to burn, but like all I know about this thing is that it's supposed to be green. I think is really interesting in our industry.
Thank you. No, that's a really good perspective about kind of the political side, especially with marijuana. That seems like it might be a bigger head wall than with growing leafy greens. But for in retrospect, was there a point where you thought, or you're noticing things that were kind of going south in that project?
Yeah, so the Colorado group, we started proving out an R&D point. Once we proved that out and had like kind of justified our investment and then did our second round, we switched to like, we have packaged that it is a separate like solution in this space. We operated that facility, I opened 2 more, and then it just got crazy expensive, right? Colorado is known for having great cannabis, and we were doing like very high-end craft cannabis, like curating our product well, drying and curing. Basically what happens after you harvest to before you ingest cannabis is really critical to quality and very overlooked. We were kind of checking all of those boxes, but from a electrical and kind of input perspective, Colorado was wildly expensive. And like Henry said, like with equipment showing up on Craigslist, we looked at and did a cost benefit analysis, right, of a bunch of different states that were going legal, and we're very, very lucky to be able to say, hey, we love Colorado, we love our people, we're going to help place them in our other states with other producers, other operations. We're closing these 3, we're going into states where our business model makes sense. We don't need to die on this hill. And I think that's what really helped, is we didn't have to die on that hill, but we absolutely did lose like 3 facilities and have to go through like talking to staff and saying, hey, like if you stay, there's not a job for you. If you move, there will be, or we will help you find somewhere else. And I felt good about doing that work, but it's a heartbreaking conversation, even when you're lucky enough to be able to provide options, right? Nobody wants to go through a layoff, which I think is probably pretty pivotal right now, given our macroeconomic climate.
Mm-hmm. Right. Henry, this question is kind of about the commonalities you've seen, not just at the farm that you mentioned initially, but throughout the whole world, or ones that you've seen in the past couple of years. Was there any, besides just kind of chasing the cool, glamoury new thing in vertical ag, was there something that was common with all the ones that have failed, besides kind of that chasing the dream type thing?
Well, as a consultant that designs these farms and as a consultant that does due diligence on them, I see a lot of commonalities in some of the mistakes. And so I think like the mistakes don't only come from looking at which ones failed, but there's also a lot that are likely to fail or that are on the wrong foundation. And so I really just on this webinar can't emphasize enough that when it comes to the CEA sector or any business, but especially a business that has a very heavy CapEx and hardware and is very novel, you really need to plan properly and take a lot of time to plan. And just like Desmond said, you also need to get the voices of a lot of different people, from engineers, but also listen to agronomy. I guess the most common things I see that are mistakes made when planning these facilities that lead to inflated expectations and then a likely failure is miscalculated waste. I think people think that when you build a farm, you're just going to sell everything in the farm. I don't know where that idea came from, but maybe it's the fact that we're like marketing year-round production, like delivered within 24 hours, that we forget that every farm has waste. And when a new farm is built, especially one that is so big potentially or so expensive, you really want to maximize and use up all that space to produce. So a lot of farms will produce at the beginning to get their operations up to speed, but they'll have huge amounts of waste. So I think you need to calculate waste from a number of factors. You need to say, okay, how experienced is the grower? How mature is the market? What is the size of our farm? Are we saturating the market with product that we're going to need to pivot from later on if people don't buy it? Are we just a giant microgreens farm and we haven't ever seen people buy microgreens at that volume in our market? Are we creating a new product that people might not like? Are there going to be flaws in the system that we discover that are going to lead to just shutdowns and waste related to that? So I think miscalculated waste is just so common that I see, and it creates inflated projections for the businesses. Another one, which is kind of a bit, I think, I just shouldn't happen, is miscalculated depreciation. So I think a lot of people don't understand that the equipment in these farms depreciates and you need to replace it. So one of the most common mistakes I see is people not calculating replacement for their lights, which is such a huge part of the CapEx. Sometimes LED lights for a vertical farm may last 70,000 hours or 7 years, depending on how much you're using it. So if you have a 10-year economic projection and you haven't calculated replacing your lights, no wonder it looks like you're making profit. And I think another thing that is very commonly miscalculated and leads to failure is just miscalculated labor. So again, as you're getting the operation up to speed, in any farm, labor is a really complex and fluctuating cost, even in CEA facilities where we sort of imagine things are more stable. As we move towards semi-automated and fully automated farms, labor is extremely critical. So I think just not calculating labor properly is also a common mistake that we see. Now, in our survey of farm operators, the largest CA survey, we found that 73% of those farm operators would go, if they could go back, they would choose a different technology or different crop. So those are two like really key decisions at the beginning that you need to look at. Another common one just to list is just financing along that journey. So, you can't typically get traditional financing. In fact, 78% of our respondents couldn't get financing for traditional sources. So that means that you don't only have to plan this like amazing facility that's cutting edge and pushing the boundaries of how agriculture works, but you also have to test that in a new market, and you have to fund that from new sources. So it really starts to get to be like a pretty overwhelming task to set up a successful CA facility, because you need a lot of different skill sets on your founding team. And that also requires the motivation to continue through those ups and downs. But I think the financing one is just a really common mistake as well. People think that because we are interested in vertical farming, banks and other traditional sources of financing understand it and are interested in it. They might be interested, but when it comes to the due diligence stage, they're not going to necessarily value all your equipment in a traditional asset form. So your ability to get loans, your ability to get value from those assets is just not proven yet, or not mature yet in most markets. It's getting better over time. We're starting to see infrastructure funds and private equity and even sovereign wealth funds and all kinds of groups getting involved in funding these farms. There's definitely money going in. But I think that next stage of funding maturity hasn't happened yet, because there's not so much recognition of the asset class of CEA. So that's a lot of information for you. But again, we try to just guide people to plan properly and go through a step-by-step methodology so that you can identify these risks early on, and also taper a little bit the naivety, which I think is one of the key reasons why farms fail. Is just like we get very obsessed with the technology and the impact we're making. Desmond mentioned the sort of even nonprofit or sort of social enterprise businesses that can happen a lot. When you're like, oh, I want to grow lots of fresh food, I want it to be affordable, I want it to be high tech and year round, and I want to be the next Elon Musk. It's like that's a lot of things, and you have to really choose between them and plan properly.
Yeah, no, those are a lot of great commonality points that you've witnessed, and I think I do notice that too, where people that are trying to get into the space don't realize that you need to be juggling like 10 plates at a time to make this thing remotely successful. They're just so pigeonholed into one particular aspect of the whole thing, right? Just like the technology part, and they're not focusing on the labor or the go-to-market strategy. And it's all these things combined that have to work harmoniously to be anywhere near profitable that some of the farms are close to being. Desmond, go ahead. I was going to say,
because Henry unloaded a lot there, and I'm just shaking my head like, it's like what you said. But just to tail off that, one of the main earlier things is just knowing how to farm, like being a producer. Like everybody goes to indoor farming. It's the new sexy thing. It's a new modern thing. It's so much tech. It's lights. It's flash. It's everything looks so nice. But I've gotten asked this question tons of times. Okay, how do I get started? And I say, well, have you grown anything? No. Okay, well, you need to start there. Learn how to grow something. Don't buy all this equipment, all this fancy stuff. Just go to a local hydro store. Go somewhere where you can learn how to begin a plant from seed all the way to harvest, and start that way. If you start too big, you're going to bite off too much, and you can chew. So just start there. But I see a lot of these, like a couple other scenarios of farms that have failed in the past. To Henry's one in Vancouver, and one in Philadelphia, they didn't know how to farm. They got all this equipment and they just started up, and again, they had community support and started growing, but they were just going through so many ups and downs, ebbs and flows, because they didn't know just some of the basics, some of the some of just the basic strategies of growing. So that's a huge thing, just the very basic of growing. And to kind of wrap up what Henry was saying too, it's just so many areas and so many niches you can go in the CEA and in this industry. Like, what's your overall goal? Do you want to be, I think I saw the other day, Arrow Farms now has the largest smart farm. Do you want to go that route? Do you want to have the largest microgreens farm? Do you want to just produce lettuce? Do you want to, it's so many ways. Do you want to do genotyping or phenotype? It's so many things that you can do. You got to figure out exactly what your goal is going to be and then stick with that instead of jumping all over it and then trying to serve every single one of these. For us, we want to focus on food insecurity and getting, just type of healthier food, no pesticides into more people's hands. That's a very large spectrum, very large goal. But like I was saying, you can also go into so many other areas. So I think once people can kind of relax and figure out, one, make sure you know how to farm and see exactly which area in this indoor farming industry you want to go into, it helps, clear some of that cloudiness up and can hopefully alleviate, less, failed farms in the future. I think those are two big things. Just knowing how to farm and just, how do you want to contribute to the industry? Because there's so many ways that you can do it. Even going to the lighting with, with Shannon had her experience with Florence before. So many things you can do in the industry.
Right. That actually reminds me, I'm kind of a victim of this failure as well. I know I'm not part of the main panel, I'm the moderator, but I think it's an interesting
Preach,
story.
Albert, let us know.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know like this happened with me, but a couple years ago when I first started getting hydroponic, when I learned about it and started getting obsessed with it, went to Home Depot, bought all the stuff, started growing. I got into connected with a friend of a friend that was trying to start an indoor vertical farm in upstate New York. We were trying to model Sky Greens, as you guys probably know, famously in Singapore, that was touting, oh, we have these rotating towers that only use the electricity of a 100-watt light bulb. And it was like this marvel of like low energy kind of growing. And so we actually were in talks with them to kind of license out their towers to retrofit the greenhouse in upstate New York to do that. And there were 6 of us on the team. I was the only one that had any growing experience. And at the time, I was a hobbyist though, right? And that was the extent of it. People were from like, the other people on the team were from finance, marketing, sales, great people, very smart. But like you mentioned, nobody knew how to grow really. Like I was the only one that remotely knew how to do anything. And so we spent months trying to get funding, talking to Google, all these investors, and they love the idea. They're like, oh, this sounds really cool. This is great, yada, yada, yada. Let us know when the lead investor comes in and then we'll join. Every single person said that. And nobody wanted to dip their toes in because they're like, none of you guys have any commercial farming experience. Why would we give you $5 million to build this greenhouse in upstate New York? Like how you have zero proof that this will succeed, right? And so I think we definitely, in retrospect, we bit off more than we can chew. We should have started small scale, grown up from there, done like a pilot facility of like, 1,500, 2,000 square feet, see if it even works, and just go from there. Even do a Kickstarter, 50K, just get it off the ground, So that was my experience with a failed farm. Never really actually manifested, but a failure nonetheless. I just wanted to.
I love what you said about Kickstarter. Oh, I'm sorry, Albert.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I love what you said about Kickstarter. The kind of 3 things on this topic that we've been discussing, like labor, team, maintenance, equipment cost, and then funding. And like particularly with the team, right? Like I have a great, it's really more of a personal failure. If it's all right to share, I co-founded a company and I was really young, right? I was in college and I did not fully realize the extent to which when you co-found a company, you get it married to your founder and your child is the business. And I would never have actually married this person. And that evolved right as we were building a business. And I loved like my part of the scope. But that was like something that like I ended up selling my equity, which was great because it let me pay for college. And I kind of got to like leave still on good terms. but it's just so critical. Like I see so many people, like they get excited, they meet up and they're like, oh, let's start this business, which is like excellent. You need that fire to keep you going because it is going to be really hard. But really, your due diligence is not just your business model, not just your financial projection. It is also your team. Yeah, I'm sure Henry's been on the receiving end of some co-founder marriage counseling. And I just wanted to touch on 2 other points really fast. Like one of the things that I loved when I was working in college, I was working with all engineers, right? I was the only plant person. So I was basically God. They're like, we have no idea how you do it. Please continue. But we had a beautiful maintenance plan. And there's so many farms that when I go in, I'm like, hey, what's your preventative maintenance plan? How often does this equipment get serviced? This is like your bread and butter. When this breaks, nothing works. And it's so much cheaper to just change that belt every year than break that belt and spend like 5, 10, 15 grand replacing that piece of equipment. So just like pro tip, you absolutely cannot like fudge there. Like you have to put in a maintenance plan. And just one more quick thing on the funding, just because I know we're kind of trying to get a little bit of that cannabis stuff. It's a weird space, right? Funding cannabis. It's not federally legal. It's very difficult to get funding. And I really loved the call out that Henry made, which is how, when you're looking for funding, they're going to evaluate your assets. And so as an example, there's 2, like you have LED lighting, which is better, but way more expensive than HPS, like another form of lighting. You want to go with HPS because you're like young and you're scrappy and you're bootstrapping. A bank's going to look at that and be like, I could never resell these on the market. Good luck. I'm not going to back you because if you fail, I can't kind of get my money back. They will back you for LEDs, some of them, but that's a way different CapEx expenditure for your small business. So just thinking about that. And if you're interested in cannabis, thinking about the fact that like, you're not going to get to have a bank account. I remember driving a 4-wheeler in the mountains of Northern California to take a shovel to dig up 60 grand of my monthly payroll in cold, hard cash with like a handgun strapped to my 4-wheeler, because why in the world would anyone be driving around the mountains with that much money? And so just like, especially if you're in cannabis, like the solving the money thing, and there's some interesting startups in this area, is just super critical.
Yeah, just like having access to banking that will accept or be able to facilitate the transaction for you. That's a huge thing that I think needs to definitely increase for marijuana growers. Carrying around that cash is just ridiculous. I wanted to touch upon kind of more like all of us here are entrepreneurs, and I think some people in the audience probably are as well, and they're looking to start up a farm. Is there any kind of advice you would give them from what you've learned so far as an entrepreneur, not necessarily related to like starting a vertical farm, but just in general, to help those people out? I think that'd be a good perspective. Shannon, you actually go ahead.
Oh no, Desmond's like a hive about this. He's gonna go.
Yeah, because I wanted to touch on what Shannon was saying a little while ago about just knowing that you have to put in a lot of work. And I don't have a co-founder with me. I'll get to that point maybe a little bit down the line whenever I need to. But just putting in the work, going back when I was doing research and doing my research and looking into farms that did fail, some that were successful. The biggest thing, the biggest common word we just kept saying was the economics behind everything. And once I decided to expand in the space right now, it was me doing everything in terms of following up, letting the community know I was here, what we were doing, what the goal was, farming, following up, maintenance, installing, everything that I learned, during construction, between being the carpenter, electrician, plumber, everything I had to learn in the past, I had to bring in here. But in doing so, I understood, okay, this is how long it's going to take to harvest a certain amount of plants. This is how long it's going to take to clean a facility, to maintain a facility. And that was me being in here 15, 18 hours a day, and on top of harvesting, running an organization, running a business, to get to the point to where now we can be efficient, because I know how long it took me to do these tasks. It shouldn't take somebody younger than me longer to do these types of tasks. So going down and just knowing the economics and knowing your strategy, knowing all those things that go into being efficient will not saying it's going to cure everything, but it will obviously help you to be more efficient and hopefully not on the other side of like a field farm. So you're putting in those long hours, you have to do that, especially again, I think Shannon, you were saying, especially if you're not one of the big five that has all this money that they can just hemorrhage money and don't have to worry about it. You starting from small scale, 2,000, trying to get 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, you have to put all that work in order to show the bank that you can successfully keep growing and be efficient and keep going. So I wanted to touch on that because Shannon hit that. I couldn't wait to,
to
speak on that.
I love that, because if somebody had asked you, I've worked for companies that have millions of dollars to throw at this, floor drains. Why don't we have, you know what I mean? Like it's truly shocking the number of like massive facilities that build this entire thing. And there's like a floor drain this big in like tens of thousands of square feet. And you have then a team that literally takes, I have counted and done the like labor expenditure, 15 people with little squeegee mops to get the stuff at the end, and it constantly clogs and floods your facility, right? Like even just going through the mental exercise of like, what is an opening and closing shift checklist? Like these are not sexy topics. These are boring, tactical, nasty, how do you get the lid open and pull out all the clogs? Things like go through that opening closing checklist. What did I realize? What did I miss? Right. And I think like one of the great things about this community, and like, you know, you gentlemen are testament to this, is like ask for help. There are like so many Slack groups and community events. Just reach out to a consultant or a friend and be like, hey, like I have to be missing something. What is it? What's really gonna bite me later?
Yeah, it sounds like you know, kind of back to what Henry and Desmond were saying earlier as well. You know, it's like a lot of people just want to copy and paste this technology or this farm without actually, and I feel like vertical farming is one of the few industries where you can't just do that, because everybody lives in a different climate. They have different locations, different crops, different, like there's just so many variables that you can't just copy and really a farm over to somewhere else. Maybe a container farm, but still, like you still have to, you know, account for climate and stuff like that as well.
Sales, even if you could drop it anywhere, but if you still don't
exactly
have
that
sales,
too.
now you're growing with nowhere to go.
Exactly, no go-to-market strategy, then it's just gonna be sitting there. Sorry, Henry, were you about to say something?
No, I mean, just great points from Shannon and Desmond, and I appreciate you sharing your story as well, Bert. I mean, on your question of like advice to entrepreneurs, I mean, where does it begin? I mean, it's like there's so many things. I mean, I think in this sector, like I'm not a farmer, but for me, getting hands-on experience, volunteering at Harlem Grown, or, you know, working at Sky Vegetables, just to understand the day-to-day of farm life and the physical labor needed in it, and the early hours and the complexity of shifting customer needs and how that affects operations. I mean, all of those issues, you just need to get a rude awakening in it. And so for me, that was a humbling experience and took me from like, oh, you know, vertical farms and like light bulb, let's put them everywhere. Like it's, you know, it just makes total sense to, okay, you know, we really have to design these things properly. We really have to choose the scale properly, and managing the team and selecting the right team is so important. So I think that just get hands-on experience in something you're interested in, even if you're just going to be the CEO or, you know, whatever, but like really get the hands-on experience, because then you can actually also talk to other people in the sector in a more reputable way. It helps you out and helps you earn respect too. I think another big one is like, we talked about business being a marriage. And I think like not enough people understand that you can dance before you get married, right? So you can find like lower commitment ways to engage with a potential founder before you do that. I mean, people don't know this, but before Agritecture, I had a consulting firm with 5 other graduates from Columbia University, and we tried to be this sort of broad sustainability consultancy where each consultant had like a focus area. I was the food and ag guy, we had an energy guy, we had a water woman, you know, and it was a very fun, exciting, diverse group of people. We had a lot of shared interests from school. But before formalizing the business to officially, we said, okay, let's work together to get our first client. Let's figure out what we can do. And, you know, that lasted about 6 months. And then it was clear that people had sort of different approaches, different priorities in their life. You know, some were married, some weren't, some were willing to do different things and go a distance. And actually my colleague Shay and I, we really sort of aligned on the way we worked together. But in the end, we decided to part our ways and end that business. So again, I think you need to find ways to test it. The same thing applies to partnerships that you're getting approached with, and just try to dance before you get married, so to say. If you are a solo founder like me, it gives you certain benefits. You don't have to deal with as much of that, but you also get very lonely. So I think it's really important to have senior team members that you give them a stake of the business, and you have them act as owners, and you have them feel that way, and you encourage and lead by example to sort of have them have ownership of the business and be guiding voices to you. And then you also have to people like totally separate from the business that you can cry to, and you can vent to, and you can let it out to, because you're really just like alone in that. And that's really hard, to be honest. I mean, I think being a solo founder has pros and cons, but it gets pretty lonely and difficult as well. I think also, just based on this panel, like, you need to embrace failure. It's so much easier said than done. I'm somebody who really is quite afraid of failure, and I often try to avoid it. But then I think it's important to take new risks. And one of our investors, Esther Dyson, she says, always make new mistakes, which I like, because it's just encouraging you to make the mistakes as long as they're new ones and learning from them. That's part of where innovation happens. That's where you can build a new process that's going to strengthen you in the future. So really try to find targeted risks. That's a big part of entrepreneurship. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but those are just a few snippets.
No, that's great.
Failure's
Awesome.
a
Thank you.
big one. Fail fast. I hear that a lot. And I try to, as much as you try to avoid it, you don't want to obviously go through it. But if you're going to do it, just fail fast, get it out of the way, and move on, and just keep going. Just like you said, just learn from it and just keep going.
Yeah, Desmond, besides normally when people ask you for advice on how to start,
Can I tell you one other thing too? I give tours often here, and conclude my tours, I always tell people, hey, I'm an open book. If you got a question, I can help out with anything with indoor growing or hydroponics, just reach out to me. I gave a tour, I want to say maybe 2 months ago, and there was a couple and a young child, and they literally came back last week with a booklet of questions to ask me. I'm like, okay, I guess I got what I deserve. But they came here, and I told them as much as I possibly could to help them out, because you can see, again, I told them, just start. You got to start from somewhere. And they went home and started, bought all this equipment up, and they had a million questions for me afterwards. So it's fun. I love that engagement, just to see how people actually are vested into it and they can jump into it, because they asked me a couple questions about trying to scale up already, and I had to slow them down, like, figure this out first. You're just doing it in your basement. You're trying to figure this out. Document the hell out of everything, so once you're ready, how to then replicate that process. Don't just base it off of 2 batches or 2 examples and think you're ready to hit the ground running. You got to do a little bit more research. It's not just trying to just go after right off the bat. I just wanted to tell that story. Sorry about that.
No, that's great. That was great.
Yeah, and to Desmond's point, I think if I had to give kind of advice on, like, particularly, I love the entrepreneur perspective as the lens. I think I'll go through vertical farming and then just entrepreneurship separately. So vertical farming, I think it actually taps into our innate human desire for control. That is an illusion. It is an illusion when it comes to the relationships with your founders. It is an illusion when it comes to this idea that we aren't affected by seasonality. There's usually a 20% difference, like a 20% degree difference in your summer and winter temp water, which has massive implications for your microbes. Like, we are not in charge. Do not let the idea of being in control kill your intuition. Don't sacrifice that to the data. The data is important. Like, I have worked with some incredibly technical people, and I remember being on the phone with, like, my lead engineer who's got, like, a PhD in fluid mechanics, and he's like, Dan, this thing's broken. And he's like, well, I didn't design it to break that way. I'm like, well, it's broken. And, like, just don't kind of let that get to you. So that's my, like, little vertical farming spiel. And then as far as entrepreneurship in general, people will make or break you. Your team and the way that you treat them will make and break your business. It's actually why I started a coaching company, because, like, I work with people like Henry all the time, where you're a solo founder, you're kind of stuck in your own head. You need a thought partner, and that fear of failure, right? Every single person on this panel and people who are involved in this industry are doing things that have never been done before. You have to fail. You have to fail well, and you have to sit in that like post-failure, icky, retrospective, how do I never do this again, or at least do it less badly next time? And that's what I really like about the business that I do now, is like helping people utilize that. Like there's no reason why our growth has to be linear. It can be exponential. It's just really painful. And then like my last one is like prioritize until it hurts and then keep going. It is supposed to be painful, right? Like you have to bleed when you're prioritizing. And just, I see so many people, and both Desmond and Henry and Albert mentioned this, is like, oh, we all want to do all these things and be Elon Musk. Like if it's more than 3, it's too much.
No, that was great. That was great. That actually made me realize something when you're mentioning about like team dynamics, because that's something that's not really specific to vertical farming, but something that I was going to ask if you guys know of or have heard of any farms that had failed because of the team, as opposed to the technology and the market strategies, because the team itself was just a bad chemistry or something happened that ended up causing the farm to fail. Did anybody have any experience with that or know of it or anything situation?
Well, there's the startup stage, and you sort of, I know of a company in the sector, and they sort of started up and they built their pilot, they got some first angel investors, spent that money, and then there's sort of a decision about where you want to go, right? Like, do you, if you didn't hit your revenue numbers that you expected, surprise, you just got started, right? So like if that happens, then you sort of have this decision. Like some people want to go more hype, and they want to push the VC story, and they want to go deeper, and they want to increase the valuation more and sort of stretch that myth. And others sort of have like a realization point where they're like, okay, we've learned from these things. Let's like readjust and let's completely pivot and let's go back to focusing on fundamentals. I think that philosophical decision about focusing on fundamentals versus going for this kind of Silicon Valley route, which is risky in a different way. Both have risks. That's a really key value thing you need to talk about early on with your team. And you actually don't know how people are going to act until it happens. Same thing happens with relationships, right? You could have a crisis and people react totally differently, and you wouldn't have learned until that crisis happened. So I think that's like, I've seen a number of teams fall apart because of a values divide at that point, where some people are just want to go one direction and the others want to go another direction. And so you really, again, that's why that dancing piece is important. Like you have to go through some hardship together before you sign this sort of like agreement to co-own a business and take on that responsibility together. So I've seen that happen pretty frequently.
I really loved what Henry said about values. If I can just cut in here really fast. When we went through that identity crisis of stopping being an operator and then just crushing licenses, one of the things that allowed us to go through that, because it's a totally different skill set, totally different vibe, is we had really baked into our team this concept that like we can rumble hard with each other and it's like worth it, because if we really engage and disagree, the solutions are better. And we will walk away without being permanently maimed. And like, I think that's really critical to this like people piece and also in your own mind, right? Like, how do you like fight it out to get the best possibility and then be able to leave as friends? And I think that's really hard, especially when like those deep value questions come in. And I love the VC kind of angel unicorn startup. People go into cannabis thinking that this is not software. It doesn't scale like that. You can't sell a subscription. Like we're in the proverbial dirt. And it's just really critical to be able to get through that with a good team.
You're going to make a great executive coach. So I was going to, so we have like, I mean, we can go over, but we have, I would say like 11 minutes before the virtual happy hour. I just also want to mention to people in the audience that you can ask questions. There's the Q&A tab on the bottom. So if you want to go ahead and do that, I'll try to squeeze that in. But the one thing I wanted to ask you guys individually, just to kind of put a bow on this whole conversation, like we've talked a lot about failure, but I kind of want to spin it and just go the opposite direction, talk about success, and ask you guys, in your mind, I know these answers could be completely different for all three of you, but like, what in your mind would you consider success in this space as an operator or business owner
I
and-
yeah, I think it goes back to like
Right.
Shannon's comment on the question that was received, right? I think like
Yeah, it's tied into
we see so many like images of success and stories of success and journalism and TV and movies and the myth of that. It's really hard when you're a new entrepreneur to like define success for yourself, because you're sort of, you have this illusion of what it could be. And it really is about you, and it's who you are. And you have to really understand yourself first somehow and test the waters for that. So I think one of the things that, like, for me, it was really important that I had something I connected with for my life. Like for me, it was about making an impact on the world. Like I sort of realized that business was solving problems, and there's all these social and environmental problems. So for me, success is making money while solving one of those problems. Like that way I can have a viable livelihood, I can create jobs, but I can also feel like I'm making an impact. And that balance is always very important to me. And at Agritecture is how do you sort of whatever, do well by doing good is the corny phrase. But I think like you're really figuring out what success means to you, not what you've seen success as for other people, is just so important as a first step. So for me, it's like, I want my success to be like amplified far beyond what I do, right? So if I look at Agritecture's and Liberating, yeah, but I look at Agritecture's impact, from our business, we're still a relatively small, agile business, but we're global, we're well known. There's many companies that have, been introduced, or people introduced, founders that have met at our workshops, at our events. Like I get so inspired, I get so much fuel from the fact that our impact is far greater than our revenue, and our impact is far greater than our amazing team and our international projects. And like that's what it's about for me, is like, how can you make sure that there's a sort of legacy of the work you're doing beyond the targeted work that we're focused on. And so that's what success is for me, is by helping thousands and tens of thousands of new farms adapt to climate change through the tech and the approaches that I'm motivated by.
Great. Thank you for that answer. That was awesome. Desmond, what does success look like for you? What, besides, I know you mentioned, trying to be as zero waste as possible on the farm, and also, trying to get these greens into underserved communities, and for you, like 5 years down the road, like where do you want GeoGreens to be? Like what does the success vision look like to you in that aspect?
Honestly, what that final vision is, I'm still trying to determine it. It's still a little bit cloudy, to be honest with you, to be transparent. I will say for me, the success right now is, going back to what I was saying a moment ago about putting those 15, 18 hours a day in, and now fast forward a year to actually having a schedule and everything laid out. So now it being it was a company before, but it actually being something that's just structured. Because before, I'm scaled up. Again, it's just me figuring things out, trying to translate everything I was doing on a smaller scale to now this scale, reaching out to everybody, trying to get customers in, bringing everybody in. So now, again, it being a structured company that I'm still building, but also hitting all the niches that I wanted to hit. Getting into schools was huge for us, and being able to be a part of that, because there's so much infrastructure in schools, and being able to supply them directly is something that can be transcended throughout the state of Jersey. Because when we first started, it was just so many doors we were trying to knock down, and schools was one of the last ones we just couldn't do it. So we just pivoted. But luckily, there was a program within the state that they were trying to do farm to school, and now we're one of the only few farms that actually participate in it. So that was huge for us. Going directly to schools, working with assisted living, food banks and food pantries. We just started servicing Princeton. We just got our first institution. So the idea is to, now that we hit every one of the niches, is just to expand and just keep going and just keep growing as much as we possibly can. I mean, the idea was to have a few locations in Jersey, but again, that idea, it's still cloudy, because it may be better just to have one central location and just service everyone that I possibly can in this location and just keep going from there. But the success right now for me or for us is just, again, just seeing it literally starting just to grow as an operation from something that started off as just a hobby level to now it actually turning into a business that's continuing to go on. And also that engagement with people, starting to see that people are understanding that hydroponics is not just, no shade against you, Shannon, not just cannabis. Because it's literally like a reprogramming.
I eat salad too.
It's literally like a reprogramming now where I'll get asked jokingly, but seriously, I'll bring people in. Oh, this is great. This looks amazing. Everything you're doing, it's unbelievable. But where's your backdoor greens at? And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. That's not what this is about. This is about getting better produce into the communities and try to get it into people's hands more that generally don't have access to it. So it's literally like a reprogram that we have to do. So I think that falls on us. But that engagement, I gladly enjoy having that engagement with people all the time now, because it's such a not new, but relatively new industry that people are starting to see, but they see it on the lucrative side of cannabis as opposed to not as much on healthy leafy microgreens or whatnot.
Right. Love it. Love that answer. Thanks, Desmond. Yeah, it always perplexed me why people always immediately assumed hydroponics and marijuana went hand in hand, because most of the photos I see of cannabis farms are using like the canvas backed with soil and perlite. So I'm like, what, and vertical farming is actually the ones that's predominantly like 100% hydroponics. So
I totally
don't know where
agree.
that initial assumption
connection.
came from. Yeah, that connection came from.
Yeah.
But do any of you? I mean, we have
sorry.
a
So
few minutes
what's the
left.
question?
Anybody want to?
What success looks like for us?
Yeah, I mean, you answered a little bit, but yeah, go ahead if you want to elaborate more. Just kind of in your eyes, what?
Of course I do.
What does like you said, like the question was like, does IPOing does that mean success? Like, or do you have to be profitable, or do you have to what is success? What does it look like to you? Like, what do you think is successful?
So, absolutely. I loved how kind of vulnerable Desmond was. So I'm gonna follow his lead on that. I think, and I'm gonna pull something that Henry said as well. So just measure yourself by your own yardstick, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, right? Like I love this metaphor, like the guitarist that got kicked out of Metallica and started Megadeth, right? Like he's known as being like an absolutely amazing pioneer in heavy metal, and he still mentally considers himself, like in an interview crying, I'm just the guy that got kicked out of Metallica. And it's like, no, you're still like a wildly successful, amazing, brilliant artist. So like what I think success kind of looks like, and I really love that Desmond was like, I don't know what I'm going to do in 2 years. When I meet people who tell me their 5-year plan, all I want to do is give them a hug. Like there's no way that and like it's got to be so hard, right? To have you should absolutely plan, but the idea that you can't build some decision points and reevaluate on the path. Like I love that I get to wake up every day and fight in the arena of self. And so I always joke that my yesterday self and my today self battle it out. And when I win, I create my future self. And then the day set back and my past self and my today self fight again. And I think that's what's awesome about having your own business, right? And I really hope that I'm as embarrassed in 5 years about what I'm doing today as I am embarrassed about what I was doing 5 years ago.
Awesome. We had a comment.
I got goosebumps.
Yeah.
That was awesome, Shannon. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great.
I got to think about my future self. I got to work on that this afternoon.
Oh man. Okay, so I think that's a great way to end this panel. Thank you for that, Shannon. For everyone that's still on, we do have our virtual networking that's happening in 2 minutes. You should have a link for the networking room. That's pretty much one of the most favorite thing that everyone tells us every year that they love doing, because it gives a chance for the audience members to meet some of the panelists and for the audience members to meet each other. And there's always a lot of great connections that are made and collaborations that end up happening from these networking events. So if you guys have some extra time, I highly suggest you join us at the networking. And it's basically going to be speed dating style, where you'll be paired up with 2 or 3 people and you'll be talking for 7 or 10 minutes, and then you'll get swapped with other people so that you'll try to get to talk to as many people as you possibly can within the hour. We usually keep it going until everyone wants to stop, but usually everyone wants to keep on going. So we try to cut it off after an hour, but it's all up to you guys. We let you dictate that. So hope to see you there. And thank you again to Shannon, Henry, and Desmond. It was an awesome panel. Great talking to you guys. Great topics. Hopefully more AgTech events talk about this type of stuff. I think it's very eye-opening and very informative to learn about. So thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Albert. Great job.
Yeah.
Great to see you, Desmond and Shannon.
Thanks,
Nice
guys.
to see you.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
See you guys later.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.